Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hello.
Today, we are taking a really granular look at a story that, it acts as a perfect seismograph for the modern media economy. It's just this chaotic intersection of, high prestige entertainment, far-right extremism, and, the ruthless calculus of corporate risk.
Right. And we have a really compelling stack of sources here. We've got everything from financial risk analyses of film production all the way to academic critiques on, the limits of post-irony.
So our mission today, and we should be really clear about this, it's not to adjudicate some subjective debate over free speech or cancel culture.
No, not at all. Instead, we're looking at a pretty spectacular professional collapse as really a textbook study in strategic risk mitigation.
Exactly. We want to understand specifically what constitutes that unambiguous, non-negotiable line in the commercial world. The line that separates, edgy commentary from becoming a catastrophic, uninsurable liability.
And the news hook for this whole thing, it hit the industry hard in November of 2025.
It really did. It was the sudden and immediate termination of actress and podcaster Dasha Nekrasova by her talent agency, Gersh.
And crucially, it wasn't just the agency. That was coupled with her removal mid-production from the feature film Iconoclast.
So the catalyst, what was it?
It was an interview she did on her podcast with Nick Fuentes.
Right.
And we have to be so clear here. He is not a controversial conservative.
Yeah.
He is unequivocally identified by watchdogs, the Anti-Defamation League, the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Our big ones.
All of them. As a white supremacist, a far-right extremist, and a known Holocaust denier.
So the material we've gathered really emphasizes this was not some, gray area political disagreement.
Not in the slightest.
And Nekrasova, for years, she managed to perform this almost impossible balancing act.
It's incredible when you look at it.
She successfully maintained a dual public identity that, very few artists in Hollywood would even attempt.
Yeah. On one side, she was this mainstream, bankable talent. You would know her from her role as the coolly efficient crisis PR consultant, Comfrey Pellets, on HBO's Succession.
9 episodes, a very memorable character.
Absolutely. But then on the other side, she existed as this niche and often deeply offensive provocateur, the co-host of the Red Scare podcast.
And the sources we've looked at, they highlight that the mainstream industry had, for years, kind of tolerated this second identity.
They did. They might have seen it as edgy or, a quirky kind of niche marketing.
Or just a manageable risk.
Right, a manageable risk. But that tolerance, it instantly evaporated the moment she provided a congenial 2.5-hour platform to a person who is linked directly to, overt genocidal hate speech.
The analysis is brutal about what specifically crossed that line.
It is. The controversy wasn't just about having him on. It centered on the fact that during this interview, Fuentes was given space to use explicit anti-Semitic terminology.
Things like international Jewry.
Exactly, and referring repeatedly to the JQ, which is the acronym for the noxious historical term, the Jewish question.
And that right there, that instantly shattered the illusion of separation. It crossed an industry boundary that is completely non-negotiable when millions and millions of dollars are on the line. Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even get into the financial calculus of the firing, we have to trace the origins of this unique public persona that Dasha Nekrasova built. It's an evolution defined by contrarianism, really.
It is, and it starts far outside the typical Hollywood ecosystem.
Right.
And that background is essential because it shows the intellectual foundation for her whole approach to controversy. So Nekrasova, born Daria Dmitrievna Nekrasova, she was born in 1991 in Minsk.
In what was then the Soviet Union.
Right, in the Byelorussian SSR. Her parents were professional acrobats, and the family emigrated to the U.S. when she was 4. They settled in Las Vegas.
So not exactly a standard Hollywood upbringing.
Not at all. And it wasn't a straightforward artistic path for her at first either. She pursued a really intellectual academic track. She graduated in 2012 from Mills College, where she studied sociology and philosophy.
And that philosophical focus is, I think, really key to understanding her later aesthetic, her whole brand.
I agree completely. She specialized in 19th century German philosophy with a particular focus on Friedrich Nietzsche.
And she's been explicit about this. She said that Nietzsche influenced her aesthetically more than politically.
Which is a very telling distinction. It means she adopted the sensibility of provocation, of, constantly critiquing existing moral structures, and that became the cornerstone of her public identity long before the podcast even started.
And we saw the perfect collision of that aesthetic and her emerging politics in 2018. That was the moment she first went what they called softly viral.
The sailor socialism incident.
The sailor socialism incident.
Yeah, that moment just perfectly crystallized her persona. She was at SXSW promoting her independent film Wobble Palace.
But she co-wrote and starred in.
Correct. And she does this interview with the aggressively right-wing outlet InfoWars. Famously, she's dressed in a Japanese schoolgirl outfit, and she's passionately expressing support for Bernie Sanders and universal health care.
The combination of the costume, the politics, and the far-right interviewer just created this instant cultural paradox. It was designed to go viral.
And that quote from the encounter really cemented her early reputation as this provocative anti-establishment figure.
Yeah, when the InfoWars reporter pressed her, she famously retorted, "You people have like worms in your brain, honestly."
And that clip was everywhere. It gained so much traction that it was later featured on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. She established herself right then and there as someone who would aggressively needle both the mainstream and the alternative right at the same time.
It was sort of equal opportunity provocateur.
Exactly. And that exposure was the perfect launch pad for her next move. In March of 2018, so just after that viral moment, she co-launched the Red Scare podcast with Anna Kachan.
Okay, so Red Scare. Initially, the sources we've seen categorize it as being aligned with the dirtbag left.
Yeah, that was the term. The whole premise was delivering commentary on culture and world events with this very distinct, often kind of nihilistic, disaffected drawl. They built a very fervent, very dedicated following, and they did it quickly.
The media analysis back then characterized the show as offering a critique of feminism and capitalism from deep inside the culture they've spawned.
Which was the appeal, right? It was its willingness to be politically incorrect, to punch across all spectrums, and to embrace this concept that became known as post-irony.
Explain that a bit. What does post-irony mean in this context?
Well, they built their entire brand on the idea that they were so immersed in the culture they were critiquing that their actual political alignments were fluid, maybe even unknowable.
So you could never quite tell if they were serious or just performing a bit.
Precisely. And that ambiguity gave them a lot of cover. But the sources are very clear that this identity, it didn't stay static. Over the last few years, we've seen a demonstrable hard pivot away from that dirtbag left label.
Yeah, the shift was gradual, but it was undeniable.
They hosted the InfoWars founder Alex Jones in 2021, which was already hugely controversial.
Right, but they used that irony defense to just wave it off as cultural commentary.
They did, but in more recent years, the podcast became increasingly identified with the new right. They started leaning really heavily into reactionary cultural critiques, skepticism of, diversity initiatives, and anti-war positions that aligned much more with political figures on the far right than with traditional progressives.
And this political evolution, it all culminated in a very clear personal political statement from Nekrasova herself.
Yeah, she supported Bernie Sanders in 2016, but she admitted to voting for Donald Trump in the 2024 U.S. presidential election.
Yeah, her justifications for that they're very telling.
They are. In July of 2024, she was quoted about Trump saying, "I genuinely do love Donald Trump for the way he makes me feel. I love Donald Trump."
Which is an emotional justification, not a political one.
Exactly. And she later clarified that a primary factor in her vote was hoping Trump would withdraw military aid for Ukraine, a position that aligns very strongly with certain sectors of the new right.
So it was a complete public reversal from where she started with sailor socialism.
A total 180.
And here's where it gets, I think, really interesting. How did she manage to maintain this hard right shift on her podcast while at the same time achieving this high-level prestige success in Hollywood? It's a masterful piece of brand compartmentalization that, eventually just completely failed.
It was an incredibly risky strategy that, for a while, paid off handsomely, right up until November 2025.
So while the podcast was moving further and further right, her acting career was actually gaining credibility.
And mainstream visibility. Her most famous role, of course, was Comfrey on Succession. And the irony there is just, it's off the charts.
She played a character whose entire job was to expertly mitigate public relations crises for a massive media corporation,
while simultaneously manufacturing her own real-life crises on the side. It's almost unbelievable.
And it wasn't just Succession. She leveraged her independent clout, too. She co-wrote, directed, and starred in that horror film, The Scariest 61st.
Which won the Best First Feature Award at the Berlin International Film Festival in 2021. So, critical acclaim.
Even that film was provocative, right? It was set in Jeffrey Epstein's former apartment and featured a bunch of related conspiracies.
She was clearly drawn to controversial subjects across all of her work. It's a consistent theme.
So how did she see the relationship between the podcast and her acting?
She viewed them as symbiotic, almost like insurance policies against each other. The sources quote, her acting philosophy, where she admitted the podcast probably hindered her career in the short term.
Because Hollywood is, in her words, very homogenous and not super tolerant of unorthodox thought.
Exactly. But she also explained the financial independence it gave her.
She said the podcast provides her a livelihood.
Right, which means she doesn't have to take every single job that comes her way. She can be deliberate about her roles rather than being a jobbing actor who's desperate for work.
That financial security gave her the space to pursue these increasingly provocative stances without immediate professional blowback.
And she even connected this impulse to provoke directly to her creative work. When she was talking about her role in the 2023 film Bad Behavior, she described her character as annoying and villainous, but also relatable.
And she noted, maybe much like me, she can't help but provoke.
For years, it seemed like Hollywood was rewarding this risk-taking, or at the very least, they were passively tolerating it as part of her brand.
Which brings us back to the central question. Why did this one guest, Nick Fuentes, change the entire commercial equation? What made him different?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the ultimate severity of the industry's response, the immediate termination, the firing mid-production, it's entirely proportional to the established extremism of the figure she platformed.
Okay, so this is the difference between what the industry might see as controversial thought, which can be monetized,
right,
and commercially unacceptable hate speech, which absolutely cannot.
That's it, exactly. And we need to spend some significant time defining who Nick Fuentes is according to all the source material, because I think a lot of people might just group him in with other firebrand conservative commentators.
And that would be a fundamental error in assessing the commercial risk here.
A massive error. The sources are, they are overwhelmingly clear on this. Nicholas Joseph Fuentes, born in 1998, is consistently identified as a white supremacist, a Christian nationalist, and the leader of the far-right, youth-focused Groyper movement.
And his ideology isn't just about controversial opinions. It promotes genocide, misogyny, and explicitly targets Jewish people and other minorities for, removal from Western society.
Yes. So let's get into the specifics. What are the documented, non-ironic extremist positions that make him the absolute commercial third rail for any major public brand, including Dasha Nekrasova's?
We have to start with Holocaust denial.
It's foundational to his entire rhetoric. He is a known denier who has openly questioned the death toll of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust.
And the sources highlight a specific instance.
They do, where he made a crude and frankly despicable comparison of victims to cookies in an oven. And while he later tried to shield himself by calling that whole monologue a lampoon, that defense is just. It's fundamentally dishonest.
And this leads directly to a crucial point about irony, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because NPR cited Fuentes himself back in 2021.
Yes, explicitly stating, and this is a direct quote, irony is so important for giving a lot of cover and plausible deniability for our views.
And he said that specifically in reference to Holocaust denial.
He did, and that quote right there is the key to this entire collapse. The very post-irony defense mechanism that Nekrasova relied on for years to sell her brand is what Fuentes openly advocates as a calculated tactic to shield and normalize extremist hate speech.
It's using her own playbook against the system she was a part of.
Precisely. And beyond the denial, the anti-Semitism he promotes is just. It's overt. It's rooted in classic historical conspiracy theories.
Absolutely. He claims Jews have no place in Western civilization.
He routinely promotes the classic anti-Semitic trope of globalists controlling media and finance, and he refers to organized Jewry as a transnational gang.
He has also publicly praised Adolf Hitler and called for a holy war against Jews. Again, this isn't political commentary. This is an ideology that is rooted in genocidal intent.
And his vision for America is explicitly based on white supremacy and Christian nationalism. He demands America be a white Christian country, and he rejects the term Judeo-Christian.
And the sheer brutality of his statements, it just cannot be overstated.
No. He made a truly chilling statement on one of his live streams saying, and again, this is a quote, Jews are running society, women need to shut the fuck up, blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part, and we would live in paradise. It's that simple.
And then he synthesized it by saying, but the older I get, the more I realize it is really this simple. We need white men in charge of everything again.
I mean, it's unambiguous. The sources also highlight his reaction to the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
He hailed it as the advent of Catholic Taliban rule in a good way.
And then he blamed Jews for having stood in the way of it being overturned.
So the pattern is crystal clear. He links theocratic goals, white supremacy, and anti-Semitism in every single major policy discussion.
So now we have to turn to the Nekrasova interview itself, because, as you mentioned, she had Alex Jones on in 2021. What made the Fuentes interview the undeniable commercial tripwire?
That is the key investigative question. If she successfully leveraged post-irony before, what made this specific interaction different? What was the thing that broke the spell?
I think it comes down to three things: content, duration, and tone.
Okay.
The interview lasted a staggering 2.5 hours. That is a massive amount of platforming time for anyone, let alone an extremist.
And the tone.
The tone was described in the analysis as deeply congenial and personal. It completely lacked that aggressive, needling critique she famously deployed against InfoWars all those years ago.
And the sources indicate she wasn't just a passive listener either.
That's right. When Fuentes deployed the specific noxious terminology, like the JQ and the talk of international jury, the conversation just flowed smoothly. There was no challenge, no interruption.
Which made her seem complicit in the normalization of these phrases.
Exactly. And for a mainstream commercial entity, like a talent agency or a film studio, this was interpreted not as critical engagement, but as endorsing the normalization of genocidal hate speech. It stripped away all plausible deniability she might have had.
And we also have to remember the context of his increasing visibility at the time.
Absolutely. He attended the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville.
And then that infamous dinner with Donald Trump and Kanye West in late 2022 elevated him from a niche online figure to a national political headache.
And just before the Nekrasova interview, his appearance on Tucker Carlson in October 2025 had already fractured the established conservative movement. The Heritage Foundation, which is a central conservative institution, saw an internal revolt over its leadership's perceived defense of Carlson for platforming him.
We saw Heritage Foundation employees arguing that Fuentes is, quote, not someone with ideas worthy of debate.
Yes, and the president of the foundation eventually had to issue a clarification, stating that Fuentes is fomenting Jew hatred, and his incitements are not only immoral and unchristian, they risk violence.
So this political context means that by November 2025, Fuentes was established, even within conservative politics, as the line you absolutely do not cross.
The commercial takeaway from all of this is simple. Fuentes is universally banned from all major platforms. He is an activist extremist. By providing him that congenial platform, Nekrasova was associating her entire public brand with an entity that the industry, for its own self-preservation, has to treat as nuclear.
So this raises the most important question, and this is where we really transition fully into the cold, hard economics of Hollywood.
Right.
If Nekrasova's controversial persona was tolerated for years, even after having Alex Jones on her show, why did this one interview trigger such a catastrophic, financially punitive response? This move cost her 2 major contracts.
And the sources all confirm that this was purely about objective, measurable risk exposure. When you're dealing with multi-million-dollar film assets, perception is liability.
So let's analyze the 2 entities involved. Her agency, Gersh, and the production company behind the film Iconoclast.
Both made decisions based on protecting their own financial viability. It wasn't about feelings, it was about the bottom line.
Let's start with the agency, Gersh. They had successfully leveraged her dual identity for years. They capitalized on her prestige roles. What calculation led to them immediately terminating her?
So Gersh, as a major talent agency, views its clients as assets, and these assets must be monetized. Nekrasova was a high-value asset, thanks to Succession and her indie film success. The Fuentes interview instantly rendered her a toxic liability and, critically for an agency, a non-commissionable asset.
A non-commissionable asset. Explain that.
An agent's primary job is to generate commissions from the work they get for their clients. If no major studio, streamer, or network will hire that client due to the brand risk they carry, they cease being profitable. They become a drain on the agency's resources and reputation.
So the termination was actually a defensive maneuver for the agency itself.
Absolutely. Firing her was a necessary move to signal their adherence to industry-wide ethical standards. It protected Gersh's overall brand reputation and, crucially, its relationships with its other clients and with studios.
No agency wants to be seen as harboring a talent whose actions could jeopardize the distribution contracts or public goodwill of their A-list clientele.
Exactly. It was a triage decision to save the rest of the business.
Okay, so the film production decision for Iconoclast is, I think, arguably even more telling.
I agree.
Because firing an actor when a film is already in production it's financially ruinous in the short term. You have to reshoot scenes, you potentially have to recast, you have to deal with massive logistical headaches in London, where they were filming.
It is the cinematic equivalent of pulling the emergency brake on a freight train. Iconoclast, this psychological thriller, was actively filming.
Right.
Nekrasova's removal was done to salvage the multi-million-dollar asset itself. That tells you that the long-term risk of keeping her was deemed far, far greater than the immediate and very high cost of replacing her.
But wasn't firing her mid-production and having to reshoot all those scenes, wasn't that arguably a bigger short-term financial risk than just trying to manage the press cycle for a few weeks? Doesn't the drastic nature of the move suggest the liability was truly seen as apocalyptic?
That is the essential insight. The short-term cost is high, absolutely, but the long-term financial exposure was total. It was absolute. To understand why, we need to dive into how independent films like this secure their financing. They rely heavily on two specific financial instruments: completion bonds and distribution guarantees.
Can you explain those for our listener?
Of course. A completion bond is basically an insurance policy. It guarantees the film will be completed and delivered on time, no matter what happens.
Okay.
But if a key cast member suddenly creates this massive reputational risk that jeopardizes the film's very ability to be distributed, the bond company can argue that the producer failed to mitigate a foreseeable risk. They could potentially refuse to cover losses, and that would throw the entire project into jeopardy.
And the distribution guarantee.
So this is a contract where a distributor, let's say a Netflix or an A24, agrees to buy the film for a guaranteed minimum price before it's even finished. If the project acquires what the sources call toxic baggage mid-shoot, that distributor can invoke a morals clause or a reputational clause in their contract. They can argue the film is no longer marketable to a broad, diverse global audience, and they can pull their financing.
And the analysis you reviewed said what specifically?
It said, bluntly, that no major distributor would buy a film carrying this association. It would guarantee a marketing nightmare.
So the producer's hand was completely forced? They had to de-risk the asset to restore its market viability?
Exactly. And let's break down that risk analysis from the perspective of the key stakeholders in Iconoclast.
Good idea.
So you have Gabriel Basso, who was the director and also an actor in the film. This was his feature directorial debut.
A huge moment for him.
A career-defining moment. For a new director, the entire press campaign around the film is their professional introduction to the world. Retaining Nekrasova would mean Basso's artistic vision would be, and I'm quoting the analysis, irrevocably hijacked by the Fuentes controversy.
His debut would be defined entirely by the toxicity of one supporting actor.
A professional death sentence for a filmmaker. Then you have Noah Centineo, who was involved as a producer. His brand is built on these massive, global, mass appeal Netflix projects like To All the Boys and The Recruit.
His brand relies on maintaining broad appeal across all demographics.
And as a producer, he has a fiduciary responsibility. An association with a project that tolerates overt anti-Semitism is a direct threat to his ability to secure future high-profile studio contracts and maintain that carefully cultivated public image. He had to act to protect his own future bankability.
And finally, Alex Lubovici, the founder of Hammerstone Studios, the primary financial stakeholder.
For Lubovici, the risk was institutional. It was systemic. He's in business with major strategic partners, including respected figures like Sam Raimi. He could not risk his studio being perceived as an entity that is tolerant of white supremacy within its productions.
So removing Nekrasova was purely a commercial decision to protect the studio's pipeline and all of its strategic alliances.
The conclusion is just undeniable. The firing was not a spontaneous moral outrage. It was a cold, objective financial calculation required to salvage a multi-million-dollar asset from reputational exposure that threatened its fundamental access to the market. So what does this all mean for the broader culture? For the entertainment ecosystem, I think the Dasha Nekrasova incident forces Hollywood to finally define the precise limits of irony in a deeply polarized and a commercialized world.
Yeah, for years, the Red Scare podcast and that whole dirtbag left movement, they thrived under the cover of post-irony.
Right.
Critiquing the culture from within, often by using the language of their opponents, claiming they were just satirizing toxic attitudes. But this Fuentes interview, it seems to have rendered that entire defense null and void.
The sources confirm the complete voiding of the post-irony defense. The entire Nekrasova brand was predicated on that assumption of irony or edginess. The moment she platformed Nick Fuentes, a figure whose ideology is tied directly to genocide and who, as we discuss, uses irony as a mechanism for plausible deniability, the industry established a permanent and unambiguous boundary.
It's important to understand the mechanism here, though. Post-irony has a stance. It assumes the audience understands the critique is layered, it's complex. You're using controversial language to expose the banality of evil or the hypocrisy of the mainstream.
Exactly. But when you apply that mechanism to someone like Fuentes, who is actively promoting real-world genocidal hate, the irony just collapses entirely.
He can't support the weight of it.
It can't. His use of irony is strategic. It's a tool to recruit and to distribute hateful ideas while providing a legal shield. By failing to challenge that, Nekrasova did not engage in complex cultural critique. She engaged in the normalization of hate. The Fuentes line is now a clear demarcation.
And the message is, you cannot maintain a Hollywood career while normalizing that level of extremism, regardless of whether you claim it's satire.
Right. And this high-profile incident will certainly lead to tangible, concrete changes in how contracts are written and enforced in the entertainment industry moving forward.
We are already seeing the implications for the dreaded morals clause in contracts.
Definitely. Agencies and producers, they must now conduct enhanced due diligence on a talent's online side brand. Previously, a celebrity podcast was often treated as this quirky hobby, separate from their professional risk.
Right.
Now, the analysis confirms that podcasts, streaming channels, even specific social media endorsements are being integrated directly into a professional risk profile.
Meaning those contracts are going to get much, much more explicit about what constitutes public disrepute.
Precisely. The standard morals clauses about public disrepute will likely be explicitly expanded in future contracts to include specific language against the platforming or the normalization of individuals associated with recognized hate speech, white supremacy, or extremism.
And the fact that the Iconoclast decision was enforced mid-production, despite the massive expense, that sets a powerful industry-wide precedent.
It shows these clauses have real teeth, and they will be used to protect financial viability above all else.
The incident also highlights a deeply concerning political connection, doesn't it? The collision between online radicalization and traditional political institutions, specifically regarding the younger wing of the conservative movement.
This collision is what gave figures like Fuentes their perceived currency and audience in the first place. The sources we looked at suggest a marked generation gap in the conservative movement.
I saw that. Conservative analysts have highlighted an estimate that something like 30 to 40% of staffers under the age of 30 working for Republican institutions in Washington, D.C. are self-identified groypers.
Fuentes' followers.
His followers. That statistic is just staggering. 40% represents a significant ideological shift. It suggests that this radical online saturation is becoming institutionalized among younger political professionals.
And this younger demographic is reportedly much more open to Fuentes' ideas because they grew up steeped in a digital culture where traditional taboos against anti-Semitism or white supremacy are fading, or maybe were never even established for them.
They often view the use of extremist language, ironically, or as a legitimate form of anti-establishment critique.
And the Nekrasova incident is a microcosm of this ideological shift. It's the moment that radical digital culture slams into the commercial mainstream, forcing powerful gatekeepers like Hollywood to draw a sharp, non-negotiable line in the sand to protect their global image.
Because Hollywood, regardless of its internal politics, is fundamentally a global commercial entity. It relies on sales in highly diverse markets. Associating with a movement rooted in white Christian nationalism isn't just politically controversial, it's a massive restriction on market access.
That's the bottom line. The core financial audience for major streaming and film studios is diverse, and it is global. An actor associated with promoting white supremacy immediately complicates sales in Europe, Asia, and Latin America. It's an existential commercial threat to their entire business model, which is why the reaction was so swift and so severe. The moral position and the profit position aligned perfectly in this moment of crisis.
This has been an incredibly detailed deep dive, tracing Dasha Nekrasova's career from her philosophical roots in Nietzsche and her viral sailor socialism fame,
All the way through her success as the crisis PR expert Comfrey on Succession,
to the catastrophic corporate liability triggered by platforming Nick Fuentes.
her dual brand, the mainstream actor and the niche provocateur, it ultimately failed the moment her provocation became financially indistinguishable from extremist normalization.
The entertainment industry, which had a very high tolerance for her contrarian nature when she was just critiquing established left-wing orthodoxy, moved absolutely ruthlessly when her brand risk threatened the multi-million-dollar bottom line.
The decision to drop her was a direct, objective calculation about financial and reputational exposure, the commercial line in the sand that money will always, always enforce.
And this brings us to our final synthesis. The boundaries of acceptable public discourse are now, it seems, fundamentally commercialized.
So, given that the industry's response, the termination by Gersh, the immediate removal from Iconoclast, was driven entirely by the necessity of de-risking the asset, we have to ask this final question.
Is Hollywood's newly reinforced ethical line a genuine moral commitment to combating extremism? Or is it simply the most efficient and profitable way to secure future financing and distribution in a diverse global market?
It's a question that really defines the true cost of ethics in the modern media landscape, and it's one you should certainly keep mulling over.